Leo, Mike, and Matthias were childhood friends, bonded by a shared passion for adventure and the paranormal. One Friday evening, while lounging in Leo's apartment and discussing exotic destinations and haunted places, Mike came up with an unusual idea. "How about we take a train trip? I heard about a night train that passes through some spectacular and mysterious landscapes," he said. Matthias smiled, always open to new experiences. Leo, more skeptical by nature, raised an eyebrow but eventually agreed. After all, what could go wrong? The next day, the three friends boarded the mysterious train, which promised to offer them a memorable journey. The atmosphere in the carriage was strange from the beginning. The walls were covered with old wallpaper, and the dim lights flickered slightly. Despite this, the three friends tried to keep their enthusiasm, thinking it was all part of the charm of their adventure. As the train advanced into the night, Leo began to feel a growing unease. While Mike and Matthias chatted animatedly about their plans, he looked out the window, noticing how the landscape started to change. Familiar forests and fields gradually disappeared, replaced by bizarre and blurry shapes, as if the train was traversing a different world. "Hey, do you guys see this?" Leo asked, drawing the others' attention. Mike and Matthias looked out the window, but they seemed more curious than alarmed. The landscape transformed into an open terrain with floating rocks and intense violet skies streaked with blue lightning. "This must be some kind of projection or illusion," Matthias suggested, trying to find a rational explanation. Leo wasn't convinced. "I think we should go talk to the conductor," he proposed. The three of them headed to the end of the train, where the conductor's cabin was located. When they arrived, they found the door slightly ajar. Mike gently pushed it open and entered first, followed by Matthias and Leo. Inside, the light was even dimmer. A figure sat in the conductor's chair, but when Mike turned on his flashlight to see better, the three were stunned. The conductor was a skeleton, dressed in a train uniform, but with no trace of life. In its bony hand, it held a route sheet, completely useless in front of them. "What the hell?" Mike murmured, trying to control his fear. Leo took the sheet from the skeleton's hand and read it aloud. "This journey will never stop. Welcome to the world beyond." Matthias felt a cold shiver down his spine. "We need to find a way to stop the train or get off it," he said determinedly. Returning to their carriage, the three friends noticed that the landscape outside was becoming increasingly strange. It seemed that the train was no longer traveling on tracks but floating through a space with its own laws. Suddenly, the light went out completely, leaving them in total darkness. In the darkness, they began to hear whispers and strange sounds, as if they were surrounded by invisible entities. Matthias tried to turn the flashlight back on, but it no longer worked. With no other option, they decided to stay together and move slowly through the train, hoping to find a solution. As they advanced, the space around them seemed to warp. The carriage doors changed, leading them through an endless labyrinth of identical corridors and compartments. Time seemed to stretch, turning minutes into hours. Eventually, exhausted and hopeless, Leo, Mike, and Matthias reached a carriage different from the others. The walls were covered with mirrors reflecting their distorted images. In the middle of the carriage, a small table held a note that read, "Accept your fate, and you will find peace." Mike picked up the note and stared at it. "What does this mean? Accept our fate?" Leo and Matthias exchanged glances, filled with sadness and understanding. It was clear that there was no escape. At that moment, the mirrors began to vibrate, and their images started to change, transforming them into dark shadows. In a final effort to escape, the three struggled with the invisible forces that seemed to pull them into the mirrors. But it was all in vain. In the end, they were absorbed into their reflections, becoming part of that strange and distorted world. The train continued its journey through unknown realms, never stopping, carrying with it the souls of the three friends who ended up accepting their fate, eternal prisoners in an endless journey. On a gloomy autumn evening, the vlogger John, known for his daring explorations of abandoned places around the world, arrived at the mysterious Hashima Island in Japan, also known as Gunkanjima. With a camera in hand and a heart full of curiosity, he stepped onto the rocky shore of the island, covered with wild vegetation and frozen rocks. As he traversed past ruins swallowed by vegetation and collapses, John noticed a larger building, once imposing, now housing only shadows and echoes of the past. Inside, amidst rubble and cracked walls, he discovered an old metal box with a rusty lid. Engraved on the lid were the words, "Open at your own risk." With palpable hesitation, John took a deep breath and grasped the box's lid. A metallic creak filled the deserted room. From inside there was nothing but the heavy silence of the breathing building of yesteryears. With a determined motion, John lifted the lid fully. In that moment, a shadow detached itself from the box and pushed him towards an unseen opening in the floor. John felt an invisible force pulling him downward into a dark underground abyss. The air thinned around him, and light gradually faded. In a moment of panic, he found himself in an abandoned mine, surrounded by dark corridors and echoes of industrial past. From the profound darkness, a long, pale hand reached out to him. John felt a cold pressure on his skin. Terrified, he tried to break free, but the hand drew him deeper into the unseen depths of the other world. When John regained his senses, he found himself in a strange world, somewhere between reality and a dream. Around him stretched landscapes of the inexplicable, distorted colors and whispered voices surrounding him. He realized he was trapped in a dimension somewhere at the boundary between life and death. Without time, without horizon, John struggled to find an exit, to find a way back to the world he knew. But every step forward seemed to plunge him further into the mystery and terror of this alien world. Eventually, the world John knew disappeared entirely. There was neither light nor darkness. It was just him, alone in a space without boundaries, condemned to remain forever captive in an unknown dimension where time no longer made sense and where every second seemed like an eternity. In the real world, news of John's disappearance spread like an echo in his vlogging community. Someone found his last video, showing the moment he opened the fatal inscriptioned box. Legends began to circulate about Hashima Island and the curse of its abandoned buildings, attracting other curious souls in search of truth or adventure, unaware they would fall prey to the same merciless fate. Epilogue. The warning elsewhere in the world, another vlogger, inspired by John's story, prepares for a new adventure. In his hands, a warning message. Do not open lids promising the unknown knowledge. The journey may be irreversible and the consequences unimaginable. Kevin had eagerly awaited the moment to finally drive his new car on the dark roads through the forests near his town. After days of anticipation, he decided to take a nighttime ride to test the power and speed of his new vehicle. The moonlight gently illuminated through the branches of the trees, deepening the shadows that merged with the forest darkness. As Kevin's car navigated through the narrow road, a cold sensation crept down his spine. In the middle of a straight stretch, the headlights revealed a pair of gleaming eyes at the edge of the forest. These eyes appeared human-like, yet the cold light they emitted gave them an unreal aura. A pale shadow swiftly moved deeper into the trees before disappearing into the darkness. Kevin accelerated his car in an attempt to shake off his fear. However, the road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of him, as if he were caught in a time loop of the night. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, a mixture of barely audible whispers and the creaking of branches, enough to make his skin crawl. Finally, Kevin's car came to a sudden stop, the headlights dimming and leaving him in darkness. A terrifying panic seized him as he tried to open the car door, only to find it locked. Around him, the forest seemed to breathe, as if it were alive and closing in on all sides. The creatures, now closer, surrounded him in silence. They were tall and pale, with eyes that gleamed in the dark like cold claws. Part of him knew these were not human. His desperate attempts to shout were met with barely perceptible laughter, blending with the sounds of the forest shrouded in darkness. With each movement, Kevin felt the strange strength of the creatures growing around him. Their cold, rigid hands touched him gently, pulling him deeper into the forest. The last thing he heard was their voices enchanting him in a malevolent whisper as the light around him gradually faded. Morning brought a grim discovery. Kevin's car was found near the edge of the forest, but he had disappeared without a trace. Searches in the forest yielded few clues, and the nearby villagers avoided venturing into the dark depths of the night. Kevin's story became a legend, a horror tale circulating among locals, warning everyone not to traverse the forests during the hours when shadows come alive and creatures hunt. Mike and Anne, a couple passionate about the paranormal, decided to spend their winter vacation in a secluded cabin in the Carpathian Mountains. Fascinated by local legends and eager to explore the unknown, they chose this location to escape social bustle and immerse themselves in the mysteries of the wild. The cabin, situated at the edge of a dense forest, was perfect for their nocturnal adventures. Once they arrived, they discovered that the tranquility and beauty of the landscape were deceptive, hiding ancient and terrifying secrets. On the first night, Mike and Anne decided to take a walk through the forest. The snow crunched under their feet, and the cold air took their breath away. The atmosphere was silent, almost oppressive. As they moved away from the cabin, Anne noticed something strange: large and unusual tracks in the snow, belonging to an unknown creature. Curious, they decided to follow them, hoping to learn more about the being that left them. With each step, their sense of unease grew, and the shadows of the forest seemed to come alive. After following the tracks for almost an hour, Mike and Anne reached a clearing dimly lit by the moon. In the middle of it stood a tall and massive creature, with fur as white as the snow, motionless. It was a hybrid apparition, resembling a giant gorilla, but with the features of a Yetty. The creature's eyes glowed in the darkness, staring directly at them. Paralyzed by fear, they didn't know what to do. The creature let out a deep roar, like thunder, and began to approach them. Mike and Anne ran, trying to find shelter deep within the forest, but the creature seemed to follow them relentlessly. In their desperate flight, they reached the entrance of a deep cave. Without hesitation, they entered, hoping the darkness of the cave would offer protection. As they advanced, the sounds of their footsteps and heavy breathing were amplified by the echoes of the stone walls. The creature seemed to be getting closer, its terrifying howls resonating in the darkness. After running for hours through the labyrinth of tunnels, Mike and Anne reached a large, open chamber. There, in the oppressive silence, they realized they were trapped with no escape. The creature entered the chamber with a triumphant roar, blocking their way out. Mike and Anne clung to each other, feeling the paralyzing fear. With unexpected force, the creature attacked, and darkness swallowed everything. Neither of them was ever seen again. Locals, hearing of their disappearance, began to tell stories and legends about the polar creature that haunts the forests and caves of the mountains. The cabin remained abandoned, and on winter evenings, those who dare to approach say they can hear the echoes of Mike and Anne's cries for help, lost forever in the depths of the mountain. The Ryan family was always busy. Between work, meetings, and daily responsibilities, there was less and less time for little Mike. One evening, at a dinner with friends, they heard about an unusual solution: a clown named Gim, who could be hired to spend time with children and entertain them. Although the idea of a clown seemed strange, they decided to hire Gim to spend an afternoon with Mike. When the clown arrived, he wore a colorful costume and a wide, painted smile. Mike's parents immediately felt reassured by Jim's friendly demeanor. As the parents prepared to leave, Gim began juggling and performing magic tricks, eliciting laughter and applause from Mike. The parents left feeling at ease, leaving Gim to take care of their child. Once the parents left, the atmosphere in the house suddenly changed. The lights went out for a few seconds, and when they came back on, the playroom looked entirely different. The walls were covered with macabre drawings, and Mike's toys seemed to come to life, becoming downright sinister. Gim, who had seemed friendly until then, had changed his appearance. His cheerful makeup had transformed into a grotesque mask with a wide, eerie grin. His gaze was cold and piercing, and his movements were now slow and menacing. Mike, frightened, tried to run, but the doors seemed locked. Gim approached slowly, whispering in a raspy voice, "Let's play a game, Mike." When Mike's parents returned home, they found the house enveloped in an unsettling silence. The playroom was dark and cold, and Mike was nowhere to be found. Gim had vanished without a trace. On the floor, they found only a few drawings of nightmare characters and small red footprints, seemingly drawn in blood. The parents began calling out Mike's name, but received no answer. With each passing moment, their panic grew. They searched every corner of the house, but their son seemed to have vanished. Finally, they called the police, but the investigation led to no conclusions. In the days that followed, the Ryan house became a place of terror. The parents began having nightmares about Gim and Mike in horrifying scenes. Sometimes at night, they heard giggles and small footsteps in the hallways, but when they checked, they found nothing. Once, Mike's mother found an old photograph in a dusty corner of the attic. It was a picture from a children's party many years ago. In the background, a clown with a sinister smile could be seen. He looked exactly like Gim. After weeks of searching and despair, Mike's parents received an anonymous letter. In it, the story of an evil clown cursed to wander and kidnap innocent children, taking them to a shadow world, was described. With heavy hearts, they realized that Mike would never return. Their house remained empty, a place haunted by the memory of their son and the nightmares of Gim. They sold the house and left, but they could never escape the image of that terrifying clown and the loss of their child. The legend of Gim lived on, warning other families never to hire strange clowns and to always be careful about what they leave around their children. It was a quiet summer evening, and Brian had settled comfortably on the living room couch with a bag of popcorn and the remote in hand. He had just found an interesting movie on TV when the screen was abruptly interrupted by a news broadcast. A serious-looking presenter with a worried expression appeared on the screen. A dangerous convict has escaped from the local prison tonight. He is believed to be armed and extremely dangerous. Residents in the area are advised to stay indoors and lock all doors and windows. Brian felt a chill run down his spine. The mentioned prison was only a few kilometers from his house. His thoughts immediately turned to the imminent danger. Frightened, he began to check all the doors and windows, making sure they were securely locked. He drew the curtains and returned to the living room, his heart pounding wildly. As Brian tried to calm down, the phone rang suddenly, making him jump off the couch. It was his neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who lived 2 houses down. "Brian, did you hear the news? The convict is in the area. Make sure you stay inside and don't open the door to anyone," Mr. Thompson said with a trembling voice. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, I've locked everything. I'll be careful," Brian replied, trying to keep his composure. After hanging up, Brian noticed a suspicious movement outside. He slowly approached the window and slightly pulled the curtain. He saw a figure in the darkness, slowly moving towards his house. His eyes widened in horror when he recognized the face from the television. The convict was right there, just a few meters from his door. Brian felt his blood turn cold. Without hesitation, he crawled under the bed, hoping it would be a safe place. His breathing was heavy, and he tried to control his trembling. In the oppressive silence of the house, he heard the heavy footsteps of the convict approaching the door. A sharp noise shattered the night's silence. The front door was struck with an axe, sending pieces of wood flying in all directions. The convict entered the house, letting his heavy steps echo on the floor. Brian held his breath under the bed, hoping not to be discovered. The convict walked straight into the living room, and Brian could see the tip of the axe dragging on the floor, leaving deep marks in the wood. While Brian watched in horror from under the bed, the convict stopped in front of the television. The news was still playing, with the convict's image on the screen. A sinister laugh echoed through the room, and the convict began to speak aloud. "They're still looking for me, but they'll never catch me," he said with a demonic voice. Brian felt his skin crawl. Something was not right. The convict continued to laugh, and his figure seemed to change. In an instant, he disappeared and reappeared. But this time, he was no longer a man. His face had transformed into a demonic creature with red eyes and sharp fangs. Brian realized he wasn't dealing with an ordinary convict, but with an evil spirit that had taken his form. Brian knew he had no chance of escaping if he stayed hidden. He had to do something to save his life. In a burst of courage, he crawled out from under the bed and ran to the kitchen where he kept a large knife. The malevolent spirit followed him, laughing diabolically. Brian grabbed the knife and turned to face it. The demon's red eyes glinted in the darkness. "Do you think a simple knife can stop me?" The spirit laughed, but Brian was not about to surrender. With all his might, he plunged the knife into the creature's chest. To his surprise, the demon began to scream and writhe, then dissolved into a cloud of black smoke. Brian fell to his knees, exhausted but alive. The house was quiet again, and he knew he had managed to escape. However, the terrifying experience had left him scarred for life. Nothing would ever be the same for Brian, who had learned that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from people, but from forces beyond our understanding. Mary and Steve had always wanted an old house, full of history, close to nature. After months of searching, they finally found their dream home, a Victorian house, isolated at the edge of a dense forest. It was exactly what they imagined. The spacious rooms, old furniture, and mysterious atmosphere immediately captured their hearts. In the first few days after moving in, the house seemed quiet and welcoming. However, as they settled in, Mary began to notice strange things. Doors would open by themselves, whispers echoed through the walls, and shadows seemed to move on their own. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but the feeling of unease grew stronger and stronger. One night, while Steve was away, Mary heard heavy footsteps coming from the attic. Curious and scared, she climbed the stairs and discovered a room they hadn't seen before. Inside, everything seemed untouched for decades. An old, dusty journal lay on a table. Mary opened it and began reading about the family that had lived there before them, a family destroyed by tragedies and unsolved mysteries. As she read, the light began to flicker, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. A dark shadow formed in the corner of the room, and Mary felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She screamed and ran out of the room, vowing never to return there again. Steve didn't initially believe Mary's story, but soon he started having strange experiences too. One evening, he saw a woman dressed in period clothing standing at the window. As he approached, the woman disappeared, leaving behind a feeling of despair and fear. The couple decided to investigate the house's history more deeply. They found out that the previous owner, Elizabeth, lost her mind after her children disappeared in the forest. It was said that their spirits haunted the house, seeking revenge for their lost lives. Mary and Steve realized they had to do something to calm the spirits. With the help of a local medium, they organized a ritual to communicate with the spirits and offer them peace. During the ritual, the medium was possessed by the angry spirit of Elizabeth, who revealed that her death and her children's deaths were not accidents. She had been betrayed and murdered by her husband, and the children were hidden somewhere in the house. As the spirit spoke, the house began to vibrate violently. Furniture moved on its own, and windows opened and closed noisily. Steve discovered a secret hatch in the living room floor, where they found the children's remains, preserved in a macabre manner. The spirits of the children appeared, seeking their rest. After burying the children's remains in a solemn ceremony, the house seemed to regain some peace. However, Mary and Steve no longer felt safe. Each night brought new sounds and sensations of unseen presences. One morning, they decided to leave for good. As they exited the house, they heard the whispers and heavy footsteps from the attic again. The doors closed with a dull thud behind them, as if the house was saying goodbye. With heavy hearts, they left the residence, leaving behind the nightmares and disturbing memories. They sold the house without telling the new owners about its past. Mary and Steve moved into a modern apartment far from the forest. Although their lives returned to normal, the nights were still haunted by memories. And from time to time, in the silence of the night, they could still hear the whispers of the old house calling them back. Leonard was an enthusiastic and dreamy teenager, passionate about videography and eager to become a famous vlogger. He spent countless hours watching videos of urban explorations and abandoned places. His dream was to start his own exploration series on YouTube, and for the first episode, he chose a place that would guarantee a spectacular debut: Alcatraz Island Prison. Leonard meticulously prepared his equipment: a state-of-the-art camera, flashlights, microphones, and a drone to capture aerial footage. He planned to explore the prison at night to capture its eerie atmosphere. His friends warned him to be careful, but he was too excited to heed their advice. On the fateful night, Leonard boarded a small motorboat, heading towards Alcatraz Island. The cold sea wind whipped his face, but he was determined to see his plan through. Once he reached the island, he was greeted by a deep silence and impenetrable darkness. Leonard stepped onto the rocky shore of the island, heading towards the main prison building. In the dim light of his flashlight, the building looked like a sinister relic of a dark past. The main door was unlocked, so he entered without hesitation. The walls were covered in mold and time-worn markings, and the air was heavy with the pungent smell of decay. As he filmed, Leonard began to hear strange noises, indistinct whispers and echoing footsteps in the empty hallways. He tried to ignore them, attributing them to echoes or wild animals. As he ventured deeper into the prison, he found abandoned cells still filled with the personal belongings of inmates who had been there decades ago. He then reached a special area known as Block D, where the most dangerous prisoners were kept in total isolation. In one cell, Leonard found something that froze his blood. Messages scratched into the wall, seemingly left by those who had been imprisoned there. The messages spoke of a malevolent presence, an entity that haunts the prison and brings madness. As the night wore on, the strange noises became more frequent and louder. Leonard decided to launch his drone to capture aerial footage of the prison. While maneuvering the drone, he noticed something bizarre on his screen: a dark silhouette moving through the prison's courtyard. Thinking it was a real person, he went down to investigate. Upon reaching the courtyard, he found no one, but the atmosphere had become even more oppressive. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound seemed amplified by the prison's walls. Suddenly, his flashlight began to flicker, and his electronic equipment started behaving erratically. Leonard felt a presence behind him, but when he turned around, he saw no one. Panic began to set in. He decided to retreat and leave the island, but the way back seemed endless. As he moved away from the courtyard, he felt a sharp pain in his head, and a nagging voice began whispering in his ear, calling his name. Leonard ran through the dark corridors, trying to find the exit. In a fit of desperation, he stumbled into an unknown room, where the door slammed shut behind him. In the darkness, he heard heavy breathing and slow footsteps. In the dim light of his flashlight, he saw ghostly figures seemingly approaching from all directions. Suddenly, the room was engulfed in a blinding light, and Leonard felt an invisible force pulling him to the floor. He tried to resist, but felt his will weakening and his consciousness fading. The last thing he saw before blacking out was a dark figure with red eyes drawing closer. After Leonard's disappearance, his family and friends began desperately searching for him. Authorities launched an investigation, but found no clues about his whereabouts. The only evidence left behind was his scattered equipment found on Alcatraz Island. When they checked the camera footage, they were shocked by what they saw. The video frames showed moving shadows and ghostly silhouettes, but no clear human presence. The last moments of Leonard captured on film showed his desperation and a dark figure approaching him. The images were disturbing, but offered no clear explanation for his disappearance. In the months and years that followed, more legends about Leonard and the restless spirits of Alcatraz emerged. Some urban explorers and vloggers tried to retrace Leonard's steps, but many returned terrified, swearing they felt a malevolent presence on the island. Others never returned at all. Today, Alcatraz Island Prison remains abandoned, but the legends about Leonard and the entities haunting it continue to draw the curious. It is said that if you venture onto the island in the dead of night, you can hear Leonard's desperate echoes and the whispers of the entities that took him. No one knows for sure what happened to him, But one question remains: what dark forces lurk in the shadows of Alcatraz? Patrick, a tall and mysterious man with an unyielding passion for the paranormal, had finally arrived at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. Known as one of the most haunted hotels in the world, the Stanley Hotel was infamous for room 217, which was said to be the epicenter of paranormal activity. Armed with sophisticated investigation equipment, Patrick had no doubt that this was the perfect place to test his courage. The receptionist, an old man with a penetrating gaze, handed him the key to room 217. "Be careful," he said. "That room has a long and dark history." Patrick smiled and slowly ascended the stairs, anticipating the adventure ahead. Once in the room, Patrick set up his equipment: cameras, EMF detectors, and an audio recorder. He then sat on the bed and began reading about the most notable incidents in room 217. It was said that a maid had been pushed down the stairs by an invisible force, and that many guests reported ghostly apparitions. At midnight, Patrick felt the first inexplicable chill. The wardrobe doors suddenly opened, and a cold draft swept through the room. Patrick turned on the audio recorder and asked aloud, "Is anyone here with me?" He waited for a response, but instead of silence, he heard a prolonged hiss, like a sigh from another world. As the night progressed, the paranormal activity intensified. The lamp's light began to flicker, and the sound of unseen footsteps echoed down the hallway. Patrick felt a presence behind him and quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. However, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow materializing in the corner of the room. The shadow grew, taking the form of a woman with blurred features, but her eyes were two glowing red points. Despite his fear, Patrick continued to film. The shadow started to approach him, and the air in the room became dense and suffocating. He felt his heart racing wildly, but he couldn't move, paralyzed by terror. In a final effort to document what was happening, Patrick aimed the camera at the shadow. It rushed towards him at an astonishing speed. The recorder fell to the floor, capturing only the sound of his rapid and desperate breathing. In a split second, everything went dark, and the room fell silent once more. The next morning, hotel staff noticed that Patrick hadn't come down for breakfast. They knocked on the door, but received no response. Using the spare key, they opened the door to find the room empty. Patrick's equipment was scattered on the floor, but he was nowhere to be found. His luggage remained, but he had vanished without a trace. Subsequent investigations revealed nothing. The recorder was played back, but aside from the chilling sounds of that night, there was no explanation. Patrick had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the echo of a haunted night and the mystery of room 217. The Stanley Hotel forever remained a place of legend, and Patrick's story became part of its dark folklore. People continued to visit, drawn by the terrifying tale of the missing man and the promise of an encounter with the unknown. But no one could uncover the dark secrets of room 217, where reality and nightmares intertwined in a macabre dance. In a chilly and rainy autumn, in a small town nestled in the heart of a dense forest, an annual event unfolded every Halloween, the Halloween party. Here, the town's youth gathered to celebrate in a carnival full of mystery and dark magic. Among these youths were Bob, Cairo, and Anthony, three curious friends eager for adventure. The invitations to the party this year were more intriguing than ever. It promised an unforgettable gathering with pale lights shimmering among the trees and shadows dancing on the carpet of dry leaves. However, an old story circulated in the town about the forest. It was said that on Halloween night, the spirit of an old malevolent farmer haunted these woods, seeking revenge for injustices suffered in his past life. As Halloween night approached, the atmosphere became increasingly palpable at the Halloween party. Bob, Cairo, and Anthony arrived at the designated location where people had already gathered in costumes of witches, skeletons, or other creatures of the night. Candles burned in strange lanterns, and mysterious music echoed from speakers, seemingly coaxing the shadows to dance to its rhythm. In the midst of joy and dance, a cold wind began to blow through the forest. The candles suddenly extinguished, leaving only eerie shadows of the trees. In silence, the youths turned their gaze to the center of the party, where a bluish silhouette emerged from the darkness. It was the malevolent spirit, the enchantments of Halloween making him visible after a long time. Frightened yet curious to learn more about the spirit haunting the party, Bob, Ciro, and Anthony tried to uncover the story behind this old farmer and what drove him to return every Halloween. However, each attempt to approach the spirit with lit candles proved futile, as he disappeared into the shadows of the forest each time. In the early hours after Halloween, the party location seemed quieter, but it left behind an atmosphere filled with mystery and fear. Since then, people have avoided the place on Halloween night, fearing the return of the malevolent spirit. The remnants of the party remained in the heart of the forest as a vivid reminder of a night when our world intersected with that of spirits in a haunting manner. Even now, every year, it is said that faint lights can still be seen in that forest, and whispered voices are heard among the trees, recounting the night when young people encountered a presence so malevolent that no one dared disturb the forest's sleep on that special Halloween night. If you enjoyed these stories, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. This was Volume 1 of Stories. Would you like Volume 2 as well?